Great. Okay, welcome to the Cannabis Research Review Board meeting. Today is, I should have checked what today is. Today is November 8th, 2022. And we have a quorum, so we're going to get started. This meeting is being held virtually and is hosted by the Utah Department of Health and Human Services Center for Medical Cannabis, based in Salt Lake City, Utah. Public notice of this meeting was provided as required under Utah's open meeting laws, and it was posted on the Utah Public Notice website. In compliance, am I going too fast here? Here we go. In compliance with Utah's open meetings laws, this meeting is being recorded. A recording of this meeting will be posted to the Utah Public Notice website no later than 3 business days following today. Written minutes will also be prepared for this meeting. Approved minutes will be posted to the Utah Public Notice website no later than 3 business days after board approval. The purpose of the Cannabis Research Review Board is to review the available research literature and assist the Utah Department of Health and Human Services and the Center for Medical Cannabis in their efforts to provide useful treatment recommendations to qualified medical providers regarding the use of cannabis and cannabinoid products for treatment of certain medical conditions identified as qualifying medical conditions. We are joined today by Cannabis Research Review Board members. Rachel, do we need to take a formal attendance?
I think it's good to acknowledge who's on the call and
Could you do that, Rachel? I cannot see everyone.
I can help with that really quick. I see we've got Misty Smith, Perry Fine, Katie Carlson, Matt McKiff, Jennifer as well, Jennifer Norris, Mike Moss. Did I miss anybody? I think Dr. Zender. Have you joined us yet? Oh, yep. So we've got a full board.
All right. Good job, everyone. Thank you for attendance help. We're also joined by DHHS staff and members of the public. A public comment meeting, a public comment period will occur at the conclusion of the scheduled agenda. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes per person, and we'll take comments one right after the other. So answers and responses will be saved for the end of the questions that we're able to get to. As a courtesy to everyone participating in this meeting, at this time, I request that you place yourself on mute unless you have been invited to speak to the group. Board motions and votes will be recorded in the minutes. Okay, and I think we need to start by approving the October minutes. So did everyone have a chance to take a look at those? And are there any suggestions for revisions or any comments or clarifications?
Perry Fine motion to approve.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. The minutes are approved. So we can get started with the agenda. Thank you, Rachel. And did Brandon join us? Because we could jump to number 4.
I am here.
Great. Thank you so much, Brandon, for coming. It was short notice, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And so take it away.
Okay. So I've received some questions from the board and just prepared a couple slides. Feel free to interrupt the presentation, board members, if you have further questions. I'm not really going to go into anything else other than the questions that were asked, but I'm open to answering any of the other questions that I'm able to during the presentation. Can we go to the next slide? All right. So the first question was, can you explain plant processing, assaying, and cannabinoid constituents that are then allowed into medical cannabis products? So kind of to go over the process of how the flower becomes a concentrate that is then used to make a final product like a gel cube or a vape cart or a tincture. So you start with your cannabis flower and you do an extraction with some kind of solvent. Common ones are ethanol, butane, supercritical CO2, but there are any number of solvents out there. And then you end up with this cannabinoid solvent solution. And then you can do other processes to then remove the solvent from the cannabinoids and end up with the concentrate. And some common isolation methods, companies will commonly do a process called winterization to remove the waxes and oils from your solvent cannabinoid solution. Others will do short path distillation. Others do thin film distillation of various types. And then there's also a kind of an extreme isolation method known as preparative chromatographic separation. And so you can basically do any combination of these things, well, some limited combinations of these things to produce your cannabinoid concentrate. And there are many different methods used in the state, or at least variations of similar methods, but a common one is ethanol extraction followed by a short path distillation. And it's not just common in Utah, it's common across the country. And that's the one that is most, has been associated with these cannabinoids that are of concern recently. Basically, at this point, any of those cannabinoids that are extracted that way are allowed to be present in products because we don't have a law specifically limiting the cannabinoids that can be present. All right, so what happens between plant testing and extraction processes for commercialization? So I wanted to go over the different steps for different product types. So first we have flower that makes its way to a pharmacy. So there are two different ways this can happen legally within a program. So the flower is grown and then the companies will trim it. And then they can either, in this first column under cannabis flower, they do trimming and then packaging and then send some of those packages to the lab. We do full panel testing for the flower. And then once they receive passing test results, they can send it to a pharmacy for sale. The alternative to that is trimming it, sending the bulk trim to the laboratory for full panel testing, performing the packaging, and then sending a small sample of that to the lab just for final product testing, which would just be microbial testing and foreign matter testing, the things that might have changed during that processing step. And then once they receive passing test results for both sets there, then it can be sent to a pharmacy for sale. So cannabis flower that is sent for extraction, you would extract it, perform the isolation just like we saw in the last slide, and then you would submit the cannabinoid isolate or concentrate to the laboratory for full panel testing. And the reason we do the testing at this point is so that we don't end up having to search through all of those different things that manufacturers will add for these contaminants like pesticides. We get a clearer picture of them before they've added sugar or gelatin or oils to it. We get it in its most concentrated form. We can look for the pesticides. We can look for the residual solvents very easily, and they don't get a chance to dilute those things away. So after it receives full panel testing for the concentrate, then they can do their formulation and manufacture of their products, and then submit that final product for testing. And for final product testing, since it's already received its full panel testing, they need to have the cannabinoids because that can change depending on the formulation, and then microbial life and foreign matter again. Once it's received that final testing, then it can be verified safe, then it can be sent to a pharmacy for sale. All right, so the question was, what is the scope and what are the limitations of the current cannabinoid testing protocol? So I have listed there, so I don't have to say all of them out, all of the different analytes that we are currently testing for in the medical cannabis program at both laboratories. So those last three down there that look a little bit more difficult to read out were just recently added. Previous to that, we were doing the Delta 9, Delta 8, THCA, and the list goes on there down to CDCA. And next to that, we have the detection limit, how low we can go looking for these things. And that's really the limit of it. We can add more cannabinoids to it, but we do have to know what we're looking for in order to find those cannabinoids. So the question here is, which synthetic or derivative cannabinoids are we detecting and how much? And then I added another question onto this because they're very similar and the variation of those cannabinoids by the type of product. So first we'll look at flower because that should be free from any of these synthetic or derivative cannabinoids. Let's see the mean for all of these different cannabinoids. Delta 8's the only one that really shows up in any significant amount. And this is over the past 3 months that we've been doing the testing for these additional synthetics, the Delta 6A, 10A, and then the Delta 10. So we really haven't seen much, well, any of those in any flower. We have seen small amounts of Delta 8 and a maximum of 0.21% Delta 8. That is a very minor but naturally occurring cannabinoid. So then if we look at the low cannabinoid final products, so these are things like gel cubes, tinctures, liquids, tablets, capsules, and topicals. So really, we haven't seen much Delta 8 in there at all, probably because nobody's trying to put that in there. And we've seen a little bit of the 6A, 10, Delta 6A, 10A, and then even smaller amounts of the two Delta 10s. So, and if you look at the median is like basically zero. And same with the min is zero because we really aren't seeing a lot of these in products. There's a couple of products that are keeping the average up there quite a bit, with the max we're seeing at like 2%, a little over 2%. I guess.
I just have a quick
Yeah.
clarification question on this. The data you're presenting, is it related to the medical cannabis program only, or is it also hemp?
Nope, this is strictly medical cannabis, no
Right.
hemp.
Okay.
So then if we go to concentrates there, we have things like vape carts, dabs, and just the general concentrates before they're sent out for doing final product formulations. And so here is where we're going to see the greatest amount of these things because they haven't been diluted with other ingredients to make a final product. It's basically just your raw stuff, maybe with a little bit of terpenes added there in the case of vapes. So again, the mean is pretty low and not what I would consider worrying, especially when you look at the median and see that again, it's straight zeros. And that's because the majority of the products here that we're testing just don't have this stuff in it. It's a very small set of these products that have any of these unknown cannabinoids in there. Again, the minimums, zero straight across, and then the maximums, that's where things get worrying because there are a couple of products that are keeping up that average. So I don't think we have a like public health crisis here. We have a couple products that we need to look into. We can scroll on to the next one. All right, so what is the process for identifying new or unknown compounds, and are they strictly limited to targeted analysis? So first off, yes, we do have to have a target to look for in this stuff. We don't have, we're not a research laboratory. We're just doing component testing. So what we're looking at here is an example of a chromatogram from an analysis that we typically see in the medical cannabis program. So you'll notice there in the center, that biggest peak is Delta 9. And if you guys aren't familiar with reading chromatograms, basically each one of those little peaks is a different compound. We could say they're different cannabinoids, but we don't really know that in this case because this was done by LCUV-Vis. And we only, as we said, can only do targeted analysis. So we have to know what the analyte is. But generally, the more bumps you have in there, the more different compounds you have present. And the bigger the bump is, generally, the more of that material is in the product that you're testing. That can change a little bit. So if we look at the Delta 9 THC, we got a massive peak there. And in fact, we actually run these samples twice. This is a vape cart. It's so concentrated that we can't really calculate all those minor cannabinoids in the same run. So we have to do 2 separate runs in order to do these concentrates. So Delta 9 by far is the biggest contributor to this. And then we have several smaller cannabinoids. So like the CBG is a minor cannabinoid, CBN, and all these different minor cannabinoids. And you can see a tiny little peak there labeled 10-THC 9S. And that's one of these synthetic cannabinoids that are, I don't know, derivative cannabinoids that we've been seeing lately, and present in a very small amount. And that's not at all unusual to have this tiny, tiny little amount of some of these things, even smaller than some of the other things that we don't know what they are. There are several peaks there that are just pointed to. And this chromatogram is very typical of things we've tested other, not Delta 9 obviously, but other cannabinoid concentrates in vape carts from other states that are brought in onto the hemp program, not in the medical cannabis, but in the hemp. And we've seen, you know, little peaks here and there. It's just not that uncommon even on flower to see little things. If we can scroll to the next one, this is why we originally, let me scroll, Rachel, to the next slide. This was one of the chromatograms that made us concerned initially about these varying cannabinoids. Again, Delta 9 was still the majority. It's blowing all of these peaks way off the baseline. But we can pretty clearly see these odd cannabinoids showing up. And so we don't really have a protocol in place for identifying new and unknown cannabinoids. We're not looking for them actively as a research laboratory. We just noticed that in a couple of samples, a very limited number, there was what looked like a significant amount. And it turned out that they're not as significant because these absorb UV light more strongly than normal cannabinoids. And so there's not actually as much there as it looks like once we did the final analysis. But it was concerning to us because we were seeing significant amounts of it. And that is, I guess, what will pass for our process for identifying these new things is when we see something worrying, we investigate more. So this is one that, you know, clearly has those things in it, but I'd like to show you as well a vape cart. And both of these are the extreme examples of things that we're not comfortable with seeing when we test a product. And this is a very extreme example in the hemp market of a vape cartridge that we got. So clearly has lots of CBD, CBN, CBC, and then some other, presumably a cannabinoid that we don't know what it is, and then just a ton of stuff on the baseline there. And this is the kind of stuff that makes us worried about processors not controlling their processing very carefully. Fortunately, we're not seeing anything like this one in, at least not as bad as this one in the medical cannabis market. But when we do see things that concern us, we definitely raise a flag on it. Let me scroll to the next one.
So Brandon,
All right,
is
have
that, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, Brandon, quick question. It's Katie. On that,
Yeah.
Are you saying that that is typical for, it's not typical for things that are sold as medical cannabis, but the hemp market, as we're calling it, is it is common?
There's lower quality control in the hemp market because there are some processors that do a very good job. I don't want to paint them all with the same brush, because there's some that are really good at making clean material and putting out a good product. There are some that are doing this in what looks like a backyard shed and really doing a poor job of controlling their product quality. And that's how you end up with things like that. And I wouldn't say that either one of those two kind of extreme cases that I just showed are representative of what's out there on the market, either in medical cannabis or in the hemp market. Those are just some extreme cases. Did that answer your question sufficiently?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Yeah. Have any patterns been detected in the frequency and or concentrations of the derivative or synthetic cannabinoids? So I took this to mean, have we kind of found a reason why these are being produced? And to some degree, yes. Again, we're not a research laboratory. We just noticed this and are trying to figure stuff out. And so it was common at several different places. Only one place was producing seriously significant amounts of this, and we did look into it with them pretty carefully. I went up there and watched them doing their process. And the common denominators from all the different producers that were producing any amount of this were ethanol extraction followed by a short path distillation. There was a mild sulfurous, well, anywhere from very mild to kind of obvious sulfurous odor of the distillate that resulted, or it's not the distillate, of the ethanol extract that was pulled from the flower, and then during the distillation process. And then we also noticed that levels can be lowered by reducing the distillation time and temperature. And that's to the credit of the medical cannabis producers here in Utah. They're not trying to make this stuff, and they are making efforts to reduce the amount of the stuff that is in any of their products by reducing distillation time and temperature. And we have seen that being somewhat effective. But we don't have an exact cause of what's producing these cannabinoids. We do know it is coming from medical cannabis flower that was grown here in the state. We expect that we could find these same constant cannabinoids in other states that are using this similar processing method. There's not a lot of labs out there looking for this stuff from what I've been able to uncover. Can we go to the next slide?
Brandon, this is Perry
Yeah.
Fine. Just a quick question. If you think back to that slide you showed earlier, where there were only a few of the concentrate products that really had high quantities of altered or derived cannabinoids, where most of them were zeros, as you said. So, have you been able to determine difference in processing that led to those products having those few products having very high doses of, I think it was Delta 10, if I'm remembering, compared with those that don't have any?
Yeah, just like I was saying on that slide, it's really the time doing that short path distillation that was having a major influence. And so exposing the material to higher temperatures for longer times seemed to be increasing the amount of those things. We think there might be something related to that sulfurous smell, like maybe there's something in there that's catalyzing the degradation. Because, I guess I should have noted that as well. These are actually degradation products from the Delta 9 THC. So as these products show up, your Delta 9 goes away. So really the companies don't have any incentive to make this stuff at this point. They very much are trying not to.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's readily identifiable why there would be product that would be more replete with derivative THC rather than Delta 9. So that's what I garner from that. So that can at least be identified.
To some degree,
something else.
yeah.
And is it?
You can
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So, like in a single company, they might have a batch of flour that they do the method on, and based on what I saw, they can do the exact same method to 2 different batches of flower and have a different outcome. One will have some of these degradation products in it, another will have very little of those degradation products. And so we think there might be, again, some kind of compound maybe present in the flower that's extracted. We really don't know. We think it might be related to that sulfurous odor that just in some cases causes more degradation products to show up.
And further to that, is there a difference in, am I correct that CO2 extraction will reduce the amount of potential for derivative THC products compared with organic, chemical solvents like ethanol or butane, as you said, but it's mostly ethanol. So, and
Yeah.
does CO2 liable to have the same problems depending on heat and post?
So we haven't really tested any CO2 extracted stuff that I'm aware of, and while we're doing this, everybody seems to be using either ethanol or butane extraction or some other similar solvent. So we really don't have any data points for carbon dioxide supercritical CO2, but with the butane, we're not seeing it at all. They're completely absent.
Okay. Is there a difference in cost related to why companies would go with solvent extraction rather than CO2 extraction? If CO2 extraction tends to limit alteration.
Yeah, I would have to hear from members in the industry on that. I don't want to make assumptions, but there are cost differences between the 2 technologies. And if I remember correctly, CO2 extraction does have some more intense cleanup steps that you have to do because it extracts everything so very well. But there are hazards associated with each of them, and really you want a method that your staff is comfortable working with that can produce a quality product. So really, it's not worrying to me what method they use necessarily, as long as they really know how to use that method and clean up the material afterwards.
I have one question. This is Jennifer. Are all these concentrates that have the 10A THC, are they from one company or are there multiple?
So there was one company that would seem to be producing the most amount of this. That's the one that I worked with most closely on trying to figure out the source of these. Others were producing relatively small amounts of it. I guess it went in tiers. There was one that produced quite a bit, one that produced a moderate amount, and then a couple that produced very small amounts. All right. So we'll move on to this slide. So is there a comparison to expected naturally occurring amounts and the synthetic unexpected amounts? So the best way to do that comparison is, again, just looking at the amounts we see in flower versus concentrates. And looks like got cut off a little bit there, but essentially delta 8's the only compound that we're seeing naturally occurring in the flower that then also shows up in concentrates, and it shows up almost exactly 10x more in the concentrate. But there could possibly, it looks like there probably is a little bit produced in the accidentally produced when making some concentrates. But again, very little level in flowers, and for the delta 8, almost nothing for these other cannabinoids. But then we do see some amount of it in the concentrates, but heavily biased to a couple of individual batches, as the median suggests there. All right, we can scroll to the next one. All right, are these processed hemp products or regular cannabis? So derivative cannabinoids can be found in both the hemp and medical cannabis market products in Utah. So again, like we saw earlier, some hemp products, it's actually much worse. In medical cannabis products, we actually have a lot more control. We see these things coming through our laboratory, whereas hemp products are often tested in labs out of state. not to throw all the labs, again, not to paint them all with the same brush, but there are some labs that just don't do analyses very well and are just cranking out, and some producers that will end up falsifying results. And so the hemp market's a lot more difficult to get a handle on. But medical cannabis products that are available in the pharmacies can only be legally made from medical cannabis flower that was grown in Utah, plus cannabinoid isolates that have received full panel testing and have been found to be of sufficient quality to be included in a cannabis product. And this was done so that we could have products that have higher amounts of CBD, for example, without having the growers dedicate a part of their canopy space to growing CBD heavy strains. We are looking at making a change there, though.
And Brandon, really quick, how long has that second bullet point been a part of the law? That medical cannabis products can only be legally made from medical cannabis flower grown in Utah? How long has that been part of Utah's law?
So there's always been limits on what they could bring into the program. Like it had to receive full panel testing, but limiting it more to the isolates has been relatively recent. So in the last session, we made that change,
right?
Because we were concerned about material coming in.
Great, thanks.
Yep. So,
Brandon,
and lastly,
sorry to interrupt you,
but go ahead.
On that other point you were elaborating on earlier about the cannabinoid isolates. So am I correct then that the companies that are now, once sort of the post-production, if you will, of products, they could take an approved purified CBD and add it in various quantities to create a new product that would be have a ratio of CBD to THC that would be specific or specified. Sort of I'm looking for words because this is this sort of different than usual medicinal chemistry, but sort of post-production to create a product that does have a defined ratio, say, of CBD to THC, but the THC would have been added as one of these cannabinoid isolates that's been approved by the state, and maybe came from hemp or came from another source, but was at least it was maybe sourced differently than the flowers that were grown, the plants that were grown specifically under the medical cannabis program. Do I have that? Am I understanding that correctly? Okay. I
just want to reiterate one point. You're more or less correct. So THC cannot be brought in from outside. It has to be CBD or CBG, something like that, because of federal law. And so, if you want a 10-to-1 CBD to THC, you're going to have to combine two different cannabinoid isolates in order to get that, unless you can grow a flower that contains exactly that ratio of the cannabinoids you're looking for.
Okay, great. And you said that's going to change. In what way are you anticipating?
So they would still need to do that formulation, combining two different things, but the thought is to have them still grow the CBD flower within the state, and so that we have more control over that whole process as well, the ability to test the flower and observe the conditions it's grown in.
Great, thank you very much.
Yep. All right.
Hi, this is Clint Young. I had a quick question on that. Does that have any effect on cost?
Clint, can we save the public comment questions for later? Is that okay? Or
it's actually not. It's not, because this presenter just presented all of this material, and this is what we have questions on. And the rest.
Wendy, I'm gonna just ask you to pause there. We're so grateful to have you today. This is a really hot topic, and we want to give Brandon as much time as possible to get through his presentation, and we will invite you to speak during the public comment period. Thank you so much for coming.
Which is almost an hour after he has spoken and given this information. So we would really like to be able to ask him questions during his presentation.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm going to go ahead and put you on mute. It's really important that we go ahead and get through the full presentation. Thank you. Brandon, go ahead.
All right. Yep. So then the last point on this one is that only medical cannabis products can be legally bought at the medical cannabis pharmacies. Hemp products are not allowed to be sold at those locations. All right, we can go on to the next slide.
Brandon, can you just repeat that?
Yeah.
What you just said? I'm sorry. Okay, if you go back.
Yeah, so hemp products are not allowed to be sold. So things that were produced out of state and tested in labs out of state are not able to be sold at medical cannabis pharmacies. It has to be produced here in Utah and sold at the pharmacy.
I think I might be misunderstanding you. They can, are you saying that as long as the hemp product was originated in Utah, it can be? Or are you saying?
So using the term hemp product is, I don't really like the term hemp product. It's just the way people understand this stuff. So
can you explain that? Because
CBD,
I'm struggling with a lot of the terms. Tell me why you don't like that and why that's used and what the proper term might be.
Because hemp is legal federally. People will call them hemp products, things that you can buy that have low amounts of THC at a regular retail location. THC is the cannabinoid that is clearly federally illegal right now. Well, I guess it depends. I shouldn't say clearly, but considered to be federally illegal right now. And some states have decided to open programs. And so that THC is the one we really care about. And it's because of the way federal law was filled up. Again, we can go around on this, but any amount of THC in a product over 0.3% is considered to be illegal according to the Hemp Act. So generally products with lower than that are kind of colloquially said to be hemp products, but if they have higher than that, then they would be a medical cannabis product here in the state. But we want products to be in pharmacies that have higher amounts of CBD for treating some conditions. And so there could be a product at a pharmacy that would have higher THC or higher CBD, low THC, but it would still be considered a medical cannabis product. And that stuff was, the THC was grown here in the state and the product was formulated here in the state. All the testing happened here at our laboratories here in the state for those products that are in the pharmacies. Does that clarify?
Yeah, I think so. I think I got hung up. You emphasized a prohibition of something coming from out of state. And then I wondered if you meant as long if it had originated in Utah, does it bypass that prohibition? Were you emphasizing the out of state or were you emphasizing this product?
So the point I wanted to make was products that are made in markets with less control, that we have less control over, I guess. So if something's made over in another state, tested by a lab we're not familiar with, by a producer that we're not familiar with, and we've seen issues with some of these products, we don't allow those to be sold in a medical cannabis pharmacy. They have to be produced here in Utah and follow our quality control testing and all that. All right, can we go to the next slide, Rachel? All right, if there's any testing, I assume that's a typo, of products sold in pharmacies, is there anything that assures no additives to more than the 1,000 various products? So here are the different testing, as I was alluding to earlier, the tests required for each individual product class. So all flour has to be tested for cannabinoids, foreign matter, microbial life, water activity, moisture, pesticides, heavy metals, and then we don't require residual solvents because the flour hasn't been extracted. And terpenes is an optional test. Some people feel very passionate about terpene testing, and we're happy to do that testing for people who are concerned about those things. Concentrates that are used to make final products have to receive cannabinoid testing, foreign matter, again, microbial life. The water activity and moisture aren't really relevant to these types of products, but then they're tested for pesticides, heavy metals, residual solvents, and mycotoxins, because that's where we can see significant amounts of those mycotoxins. And then final products that are made with that tested concentrate receive cannabinoid foreign matter and microbial testing before they're allowed to go to pharmacies. So all of those secondary products first receive full panel testing as a concentrate and then final testing as a packaged product. And we test for a pretty wide array of different potential contaminants in each of those categories. For example, the pesticide method has over 60 different compounds that are tested for. Heavy metals has 4 different compounds. Residual solvents is somewhere in the 50s as far as number of different compounds that we're testing for. And we're still reviewing literature for different things to limit in these products if we find things that are being added that are considered to be deleterious by some kind of health body. We can go to the next slide. Can you clarify the difference between banning a substance versus disallowing synthetic or derivative substances in products obtainable and distributed by Utah medical cannabis pharmacies? So I'm just guessing at what this question meant. I'm not absolutely certain, but banning something, you have to set a limit where you ban something, because scientifically you can never prove that there's none of that in there. Right, so we have to set a limit, and we generally set that slightly above our detection limit or right around our detection limit, so that we can verify that we're seeing something present in a product and justifiably say that it needs to be not sold in the program. As far as, yeah, I'm not sure if the person who submitted that question wants to clarify it at all. I'd be happy to.
Yeah, Brandon, this really gets at
clarify
the issue of what is allowed in terms of thresholds for especially THC derivatives in the medical cannabis program, what's sold in pharmacies and what Ag and DHS has control over, versus what other regulatory actions would be required that would be matters for the legislature to take up. You know, the legislative
Gotcha.
process takes a considerable amount of time and effort and understanding, and there are all sorts of forces that influence legislative action, as we know. Whereas this is more of an executive action that could be taken, maybe be challenged legislatively, but it would seem a simpler process to simply disallow certain threshold. For instance, we go back to those certain products that we talked about earlier that are the outliers for whatever processing reasons. They've got a high load of stuff that, quite frankly, most of us on this board, and I know a lot of folks in the advocacy space justifiably have great concerns from a public health standpoint about, and it would seem a lot easier simply to prohibit those than it would be to, and separately go through legislative action and people who want to proceed with regulatory kind of processes. So that's what I'm really trying to distinguish. It's sort of more of a administrative process that we could go through, and how can we more expeditiously take on the public health concerns about what's in the medical space than that other whole issue that would have to be taken up legislatively.
So our ability to ban certain things is somewhat limited. So we need to be able, as the Department of Agriculture, to say something is a deleterious substance before we can just decide to ban it. We don't have full autonomy or dictatorial powers to just say this is what you can include in your product or not. And I think that was done for a very good purpose. UDAP is not a health body. We look to DHHS, the FDA, USDA, in all of the different testing we do to determine what things should be allowed in products and what things should not be allowed in products. That's where we get our list of the different heavy metals we test for. So As agriculture, we're not public health professionals, so we're not going to weigh on whether those individual cannabinoids are a deleterious substance. What we will do is test for them and not allow a product to pass testing if a public health body has said that substance shouldn't be in the product, or if there's a law saying that a certain cannabinoid or any other ingredient can't be in a product.
Okay. Rich, do you want to weigh in sort of on that from the standpoint of if decisions were to be made about what, I don't want to using the word ban has implications. It's more of a, that's more of a regulatory higher level, but in terms of disallowing, what we would concern is, and deleterious has implications too, because just because something has not been proven to be deleterious doesn't mean it isn't. So we're sort of caught up with a little bit of rhetoric here, but if the decision was, it was viewed that derivative THC products, having not been demonstrated to be safe nor effective, but especially safe, quite frankly, because efficacy is a whole nother issue, but especially safe, could Department of Health and Human Services at this point, and Rich, that would be your entry point into this, make a decision about limiting or creating very low thresholds. For instance, most of the other products we've seen are able to be, processed and created without those, and to, be able to keep the outliers out of there.
Yeah, Dr. Fine, it's a fair question, and our position is that the current law requires that we have evidence of a particular ingredient or cannabinoid having harmful effect on the patient before we can take that action under the current statute. What other states have done is that their state legislatures have gone beyond that, and they have placed additional restrictions on synthetic or derivative substances where they don't allow them on the market in a adult use or medical program. And that's something I think policymakers are considering as they prepare for the 2023 legislative session. And I know they're listening to different parties as they consider that as an option as they move forward. But we are always inviting the public and researchers to share with us any research they have. We've asked for that, and we've received several comments from patient advocates, and we're grateful for that, and also from other experts across the United States. And we continue to know that Delta 10 THC, Delta 6 THC, and those substances have not yet had the scientific evidence that we need in order to take action as a state agency. We would need lawmakers to take additional action in order for us to do that. So that's where we're at right now. We do have concern for the safety of patients. There have been steps that the Department of Agriculture has taken and that we have taken already to address the concerns that we have. One is during the last session, there was a bill that everybody, I think, on this meeting already knows about, is that it required labels be placed on every product that has a synthetic or derivatives cannabinoid. So patients can see on the product if there is a label that has that, and then they can ask questions about that if they have them. Some of them don't have questions and they decide not to purchase those products. Others decide to buy those products anyway. The industry is deciding whether to continue to produce those products or not. But there was action taken by lawmakers to help patients be better informed about the products that do have those types of cannabinoids, right? In addition, we did take action to send a public bulletin to all medical cannabis cardholders in the state of Utah, reminding them about these labels that help them learn more about the products that they are consuming, whether they have the synthetic or derivative cannabinoids. So those are just two examples of things that Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Agriculture have done already as we continue to learn more about this subject and educate ourselves and lawmakers about the subject. And I think that helps provide a little bit of background in addition to what's been shared already.
Mike, why don't you go ahead and
Yeah,
share your
a
comment.
couple comments and questions. Thanks, Kay. Mike Moss of Boyden Center. I agree that like something that is 40% 6A, 10A is kind of stretching the definition of being a cannabis product if it's majority degradation products and not even naturally occurring THC, and whatever language would be of things that are naturally occurring, and how could you even define naturally occurring, and what is the allowable scope of dozens of phytocannabinoids and compounds that could be allowed and degradation products wouldn't be. And I realize that gets to be a really sticky way to come up with the appropriate language that would be usable and practical in any way, but certainly that something that is 40% degradation product really stretches the imagination to be something that could be allowable, even if we find ourselves stuck from a statute perspective of what we're able to say. I know that a couple board members have tried to look into what is out there as far as unsafe effects, and we are exceedingly limited to some things from like the 60s where someone isolated a few of these compounds and threw it at a mouse one time, and we know almost nothing about them. There are some anecdotal reports from users out there, but those are really hard to pull apart from all the other cannabinoids. So there's almost nothing out there to say that they're deleterious. Unfortunately, those certainly make sense that these are unknown unknowns that we simply just don't know, since these haven't been long-standing components of natural cannabis. So that's just my comment. Brandon, a couple questions for you was, I'm not sure, was one of those compounds you were listing of the 6A, 10A and Delta 10, did you have THCO acetate in there at all? Or is that something else you guys are testing for, or is that not one of those?
We do look for that. It's not part of our standard panel, but we look for it because we've seen it mostly in the hemp program, usually intentionally because they can't put Delta 9 in there. But we don't make it a part of our standard panel, similar to HHC and a couple others, THCP, that are more popular on the hemp market.
And how do you guys have a process or rules that you're allowed to decide when to add different compounds? I don't know if there are others that could be out there that we haven't figured out. The ones you have listed do seem to be the ones that I've come across in my reading and research. Is there some process for allowing you to add those there? It doesn't look like you're allowed to take any action based on that, but you're at least noticing what's there and reporting it to us.
Yeah, we do have, in the last session, we were able to get authority to limit these things in hemp products. And so we do have a little bit more control there and have banned all of these weird synthetic cannabinoids from being present, other than Delta 8 at this time. We're looking to resolve that as well, though. But we do have the ability to look for these things. There's not really an official process because it changes so frequently. You know, somebody's going to come up with a new derivative tomorrow, and if we see it gaining any kind of popularity or it being available or advertised as available in the state in some shop, we're going to try to find a standard for it and start testing it. But again, that mostly happens on the hemp side because they don't have the ability to get Delta 9 in their products.
Right, really different incentives aligned there. Last question is, are you aware of any other states that have any sort of regulations on processing or extraction if you've identified a particular process that seems to be problematic compared to others? Or is it all done at the testing stage, and whatever process you use to get there, as long as you meet the requirements for testing, that's okay? Or do you know anything about other states in that realm?
There are a few that have limits on the testing that's available. I don't think I'd have an extensive enough knowledge of it to address it off the top of my head, but a lot of it is focused on the testing, just because unless you're present there for the entire step, like having somebody watch over them like a hawk, and we do have cameras so we can look to some degree, but without being there, knowing exactly what they're putting in at each step, anything like that, it would be really difficult to enforce a ban on some things. And so a lot of it just relies on testing, being able to find these harmful substances and figure out what harmful substances might be present in a product.
Okay, so then from whatever would happen from a legislative standpoint or rulemaking would be better focused on a testing component rather than saying your distillation process is wrong, but as long as you do the testing requirement, then that would be where we should maybe focus our efforts.
Yeah, I think for now that's probably best. But if we do identify a process that is, you know, associated with harmful outcomes for patients, I would certainly be in favor of limiting the use of that.
Thank you.
Yep.
And
then there
Brandon,
was oh, go ahead.
You're referring to products becoming popular. Is that based on sales, or how are you determining that? And can you just explain, so I'm not making assumptions? I'm thinking the popularity is based on, well, actually, what is the popularity based on, as far as you can tell?
But generally, we look at two different things. So just what we see in our testing. So if we start seeing a particular spike in one of those cannabinoid profiles that we were looking at earlier, if we see something occurring frequently, we're more inclined to look into that, and I'd consider that maybe not more popular, but more common, something that we're seeing regularly. As far as more popular, we do keep an eye on kind of national trends in the hemp, well, I don't know, cannabinoid space, not just hemp, because some programs across the country allow this stuff in the recreational markets entirely. And so we look at the stuff that's being advertised, but particularly in places where cannabis is severely restricted, there are these companies that are trying to get around those restrictions by using derivatives. That's where the real incentive is, to put these things in your products. And so they'll very blatantly advertise these things very frequently. Oh, our product contains Delta-8. And they do that because their state has limited enforcement on Delta-8 products, or same with THCO acetate, same with HHC. They'll actually just brandish it and clearly label their product as containing that because they think they can stay ahead of the regulators and the laboratories.
And then I just want to go back. What I'm hearing, Rich, is the department's not able to take a recommendation and make it into I don't know if I want to call it a rule, but kind of a warning, a disallowal of certain products. But I think that, that goes back to our effort of trying to create a medical program and applying medical standards. And because that, if something's been shown, 50 years ago to have been tested in mice, and that's all that we have, I don't think that would pass muster for a medicine being allowed in a pharmacy. And I'm assuming there would be some sort of statement preventing that. So it seems like our hands are tied out of an abundance of caution, maybe. I'm not quite sure what that is. And it seems odd that it would be up to the legislators and, to include that, addressing that issue amongst all of the things that they have to address each session.
Yeah, that's a good point, Katie. I think one of the important things to keep in mind is that the FDA has certain laws regarding products that are sold in the FDA approved neighborhood pharmacies. And although there's some parallels between the FDA standards and our standards, it's not a mirror of the standards. And it's the same way in other states. And there's a policy choice that lawmakers can make to make our laws just a little bit more similar to the FDA standard. And they're not the same right now, but I don't think they'll ever be exactly the same. But there's, I think, information out there that other states have acted on to make it so these type of products have certain restrictions on them more than what we have. We do have some restrictions. They all require a label. For example, a label that is not required of all other products, right? So there is at least one step that's been taken, but up to lawmakers if they want to take additional steps. Without additional evidence, we interpret the law to not allow us to actually disallow these products. But something that we're listening to, we're continuing to give input to lawmakers and to other entities that we know care about this like we do. And we're glad that we've got board members like Mike Moss and others who have been giving their thoughts, doing research. We've got an academic pharmacist that's helping us. We've got a division of epidemiology that's doing research on their end as well, looking at literature. And the consensus has been there is not evidence that it's harmful. But other states have gone beyond it, despite the fact that there is not the evidence of being harmful. And our lawmakers can decide to take that next step as well.
Katie, maybe let me try and put into words what I think a lot of us have been thinking about this and communications back and forth, including from some of our friends in the advocacy groups. It seems like we have two parallel process and they're disparate. And the traditional convention is, or the convention is, that something doesn't get allowed into and called a medicine unless it's been demonstrated to be safe. Here, you've got a situation where you have to prove that it's harmful before you can prohibit it or limit it. And that's the complete opposite of conventional approaches to the practice of either medicine or medicinal pharmacy and so on. So that seems, and I'm just going to use the word, it seems perverse. It seems to fly in the face of good public health and 100 years, now going on 120 years, of best practices to assure safety. Now, things get on the market and go through all the usual processes and are still found in phase 4 post-marketing to be harmful, and adjustments are made. But boy, there's so many steps along the way to try and prevent that. And we know, I think people have mentioned things like the thalidomide disaster, and there are many along the way. Vioxx, was taken off the market, and it was a very efficacious drug, but it also caused inordinate harm in terms of cardiovascular and cerebrovascular consequences. So why do we have a complete disparate or opposite approach towards policy with regards to this unique space? Why don't we do it the way it seems to guard the public health? Now, maybe that's a question we have to bring to the legislature itself, because they're the ones that created the initial statute. But it seems we've put ourselves into a trap that we can't get out of, and may in fact lead to inordinate harm until such time as it's proven that there is harm. Anything goes. Does that describe what a lot? And Matt, I'll defer to you now because
Yeah, go ahead, Matt. But yeah, I think we're on that same page.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that completely. We just have this trap that you described, and I thought you were going to go down a different route where we have these two parallel situations that Brandon described. When he says the hemp side or the cannabis side, we have these two parallel organizations or what's the word? We have the cannabis program, which he demonstrated that through that testing and research, or the testing that labs does, that what's sold in cannabis pharmacies is compliant, it's high quality, it's not contaminated. But then we have this hemp side. I'm asking if I'm understanding correctly. Then we have this parallel hemp side that is less compliant or less standardized, or has more of the contaminants now. So Brandon's testing both, right? Brandon's involved in both tracks. And Rich, when you say we, are you referring to the legislature or the state or the Department of Health or the cannabis program, right? So a lot of times these lines are getting blurred, where it seems like to me the cannabis program is operating well enough, to provide good products that are in compliance, but the hemp program's not, right? The hemp program is getting around the laws, and that's where more of our problems lie. And so I'm just asking clarification. Is that kind of a decent summary of where these problems arise from? I
Well,
hope.
across the United States, I'll just make a quick comment, Dr. McKiff. Across the United States, when there were concerns about Delta 8 and the Valley crisis, right? It's a slightly different type of an issue, but that was black market. Now, in the legal markets, there is major concern within hemp programs across the United States because they're skirting the federal law. And so they don't have to go through the adult use cannabis programs or the medical cannabis programs. They're able to just, across state lines and sell directly to patients or to consumers without them being patients in a medical program. It's, they're able to just hand these things out like candy. And so that is a major concern of both Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Agriculture and Food. And there are separate laws that relate to each program. As Brandon knows, there's language that is specific to hemp. There's language that's specific to cannabis. And sometimes people confuse those and think they're one and the same, and they're not. But I want to emphasize that Department of Ag and Department of Health and Human Services have reviewed the law together. We've interpreted it the same way, and we've communicated to the public some concerns that we have about the products that are synthetic or derivative substances. There's different types of these products. Just because a product that has a synthetic doesn't mean it's of concern as much as another one. There's a lot we don't know. So we've sent out a public bulletin, and some agreed with how we did that and others did not, but we sent it out directly to the 58,000 patients participating in the program. And we also do require those labels. So patients can see immediately what that label says, and they can choose if they want that product or not. And I'll emphasize also the companies in Utah that participate in the program, they're choosing whether they continue to process those products. Some have never even processed them at all. Never done a synthetic or derivative substance that requires the label. And others have done it more. So they're making their own decisions, but in the meantime, I know lawmakers are considering taking that additional step. And that's something that those participating in the meeting today are welcome to contact lawmakers more about as they make that decision.
Well, I'll just say one thing.
I was just going to say, Matt, I think that what you said is exactly true. And I think what maybe we're hearing also is it falls outside of the medical cannabis program. But it's degrading the quality and the trust of the medical program. And I think that is within our purview. And I hear, Rich, you're making it clear. We can't do anything about that. That's the legislature, and we are communicating with them. But I think it's just important to acknowledge that. And I think Matt's summary was spot on. And I think it's the other thing I just don't want to lose is that within the program, we're playing a kind of a dangerous game where we are, everything's allowed, and then you have to work really hard to disallow the things that might not be safe. We're not sure, but we sure don't have proof that they are safe. So I think those are two separate problems. One is squarely inside the medical program, one is not. But we're again, as this board, we're trying to make recommendations to create a medical or ensure that the medical program is medical. And that always starts with safety. So I think they're both well within our, discussion range. I'm aware we're going a little bit over time, but I didn't want to lose, Matt, what you said. Exactly. Well said. And go ahead.
I just wanted to thank Brandon. I was pumping gas yesterday. I was thinking about our meeting today, and I saw that little sticker by the gas pump with a Utah logo, and it said, this pump and this gas has been tested by some state agency to make sure that it's compliant. and I'm putting it in my car. So I appreciate state labs and their role to do that, because I can go to any gas station and be assured that I'm getting not watered down gas. And so I see that role for your lab, Brandon, that you're helping all of us feel safe about what's going on. So thank you.
I appreciate that.
Really quick, Katie, that I thought I'd add is you're welcome if you choose to have the public comment period go immediately after this, while I think thoughts about the presentation are fresh. And Danielle and I can postpone our presentations for later if that's, it's up to you as to whether you want to move around our agenda like that. Or of course,
Brandon, how many more,
discussion.
we jumped in on your space, Brandon. Hey, let's let Brandon finish this up. And I would like us to, we have until 10:30 for public comment. So I would like, maybe we can postpone the updates from the Cannabis Center, but the public health outreach efforts are usually pretty brief, and I think that it's important to get those on the book. So I'd like to keep that if possible, but Brandon, please continue. We'll give the floor back to you.
Thank you. I am just about finished up. The last question I didn't put on here because it was asking what I thought of several different papers that have been presented to me on the topic of synthetic cannabinoids. And the bottom line response I have to almost all of them is they do concern me. I'm not super comfortable with having unknown things in cannabis products, but there are a lot of unknowns with cannabis. Having said that, even things that naturally occur in cannabis, there are some unknowns there. I do think that some action is necessary to ensure that all the products in Utah we're acting out of an abundance of caution and keeping patients as safe as possible. If there's any questions with regards to specific papers that you guys send along, I'm happy to answer those, but a lot of them, the concerns with synthetics in particular is really how well they control their process. And in a lot of cases, these processes aren't being controlled very well. Synthetic chemistry is not uncommon in the, traditional pharmacy space. And as long as it's done well, it can produce things that are very safe. But I don't think that's the space we're in here with medical cannabis at this time. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Brandon. I think it's really helpful, for us to hear from you. We hope you'll come back at the next invitation. We appreciate you, and I agree with Matt's statement that what you're doing is important, and we appreciate it. I think we can finish up a little early and start public comment at 10:25, and that gives Danielle about 10 minutes. So I would like us to do that, and then let's go to public comment.
Okay, hi everyone. And really, I think the outreach efforts will be pretty brief again, as usual. So the big one is just that we have started our social media campaign about medical cannabis. We did post a post on Facebook and Instagram about some of the health effects of medical cannabis and some of the side effects that people should be aware of and be talking to their health providers about when they use medical cannabis. And after we've gotten some feedback and had more discussions about our social media marketing plan and how to move forward with that. And so what we're going to start doing and see how this goes is we're going to put an education piece into our monthly newsletter. For example, this month's newsletter, I'm going to send it out on Friday, and we're just having some information about waiting to drive after using medical cannabis. So again, just emphasizing the public health, the public safety aspects of medical cannabis. And then we'll reach out to our public information officers that oversee Facebook, and they will link to the monthly update on Facebook and just kind of have a recap. So that way we're sending people directly to our monthly update. They can get more information about the program more information about our general education, public health outreach efforts, and then sign up for updates and be directed directly to us as well. That's really the big thing we're working on outreach wise. Any questions for me?
Danielle, I was wondering if you could say the Instagram handle, or how do people see these updates?
Oh yeah, so it's just on the Department of Health and Human Services pages. So I believe it's DHHS. In fact, I can pull my phone up really quick and just double check, because I do follow them on my personal ones, but it is just the general Utah Department of Health and Human Services pages.
Great, thank you.
I have a question, Katie, to Mike Moss. Mike, in the Poison Center, when there are cannabis-related reports, is there a distinction that's clearly made in a database that's kept with regards to whether this cannabis is derived from, or these issues derived from cannabis from the medical program, from I don't know, the street versus the local truck stop where somebody might get a quote hemp-derived.
Yeah, great question,
source.
Perry. We actually had a discussion with I believe Sarah, and I can't remember who else, maybe sometime last year, and it's something we decided to add to our standard sort of question to people is this a Utah medical cannabis product or not? Sometimes we're getting a call from a doctor in an emergency room or something who doesn't know, and they have to go ask the patient, and we don't always get the best information. And we also have to rely on people to tell us the truth if they didn't get it from a legal source, so we are trying to collect that information, but I don't know specifically. Certainly we know if someone says they got into a Delta 8 product that they bought at a head shop, then we obviously know that's not a Utah medical product, and we have a separate sort of code for Delta 8 products and things like that. And so occasionally we do, or if we know that it's an unusual candy that's not allowed, right? If you get something that looks like a Kit Kat bar that you bought in California, we'll know just by kind of circumstance around it. So it's something we've tried to add to clarify to our data, but I think it'll be kind of difficult to know for sure. I can at least say I haven't had a huge number that we know for sure from there. And we get unspecified edible. And if it's a toddler, then the parents are very sometimes unwilling to say where something came from, and they're afraid of getting into trouble and things. So that does kind of cloud our data on knowing exactly the source of these products when we get calls. Yeah. We're trying our best.
Okay, I think that helps to add to the language, Katie and Rich, that we need as a board to communicate to our legislature, the Health and Human Services Committee specifically, that, in the absence of, in the long time coming to try and get adequate and meaningful data about toxicity, especially of synthetics or derivatives, and the extraordinary unlikelihood that anybody is ever going to fund methodologically sound studies looking at clinical outcomes, toxicology, especially of all the different derivatives of which there are now increasing numbers of, versus what's in quote naturally occurring cannabis. That we have to err on the side of caution rather than on the side of, well, we haven't proven that it's harmful, therefore, let it go. And I think that language and using your experience, Mike, in toxicology in the Poison Center, as well as the recognition that there are not going to be methodologically sound studies that are going to be able to determine harms. It's going to be happenstance, and we'll never really know because there's so many, if you forgive the pun, contaminants to the data that we need to use, make recommendations that guard the public health to the legislature in that regard. So they clearly understand the difference between, well, hey, it's, these are just things that happen and people, there's no evidence of harm, versus this is simply not the way to conduct a good medical program. So thanks, Mike, for that clarification. And
Perry, I will add, this is a separate topic that I'd be happy to tell the board more about, but we've seen across the country, every time a new state rolls out either a medical program or a recreational program, that reports to poison centers and visits to ERs increase, and all the different states, different countries, provinces in Canada, that we always see more people coming in with accidental exposures. Really difficult to tie that down to a specific contaminant cannabinoid unless it's a known like Delta 8 product. But we certainly know that poison center calls and ER visits increase across the board just by nature, right? If there's more of something out there, more people are going to be exposed to it that it was unintentional, or they will get a dose that they weren't expecting. So that I can certainly tell you, whether we know exactly where it came from, but it pretty much without exception, every time there's a new program in a state, exposures increase.
Yeah, I think I would like to hear more about that, Mike. So let's try to get that on the agenda for the next meeting, if possible. And I also appreciate your comments and your question, Perry. Any other questions about that from the board before we go to public comments? Okay, so we'll move to our public comment section. If you wish to make a comment, select the raise your hand function appearing at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to accommodate your requests to make a comment. Just a reminder, state your full name, your affiliation, and disclosures related to financial interests pursuant to the agenda items you would like to address. So we hope that you can keep your comments limited to those that relate to the agenda items. And we ask that you disclose any association or any type of financial relationship with a grower, processor, manufacturer, marketer, or seller of hemp, cannabis, or cannabinoid products, or an organization that lobbies for or on behalf of such. We want to hear as many comments as we can. Board and staff, please make note of any comment that you would personally like to respond to, and then hold your responses until we've been able to get to all the comments that we can. And we'll run the public comment section until 10:50. So Rachel, I'll hand it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Carlson. So I'm going to actually start with a comment that came earlier in the chat from Kelly Lake. She was not able to stay on for the end, but I told her in the chat that I would ask her question. Kelly is a patient and member of Truth. She claims no financial benefits from the medical cannabis industry. She states, I'm submitting this before the comment period due to a scheduling conflict. What weight are you, the health department, and other official departments giving to the information submitted by subject matter experts, especially those that have been consulted by the state, i.e. Dr. Cashlin, et cetera? As a patient, I'm feeling like a test subject who hasn't been warned or advised regarding synthetics. COAs are generally not easily obtained. And then lastly, she states, can you also give clear guidance on reporting bad practices by pharmacies, not giving out COAs, moldy edibles, et cetera? We can't return bad products. So what do we do if we get something that has hot hemp? Okay, I'm going to go to Clinton Young. Clinton, you have 2 minutes. Please go ahead and state your name and any affiliations.
Hi, my name is Clinton Young. I have no affiliations. I'm a patient. I had questions as to, well, first I'd like to say thank you for your efforts here. I appreciate that you're trying to provide some oversight, and I realize the limitations that you're under. Thank you for at least providing data that helps us to build off of so we can be more informed. That's very empowering as a patient. I wondered, the regulations, if there's an impact from the regulations on the cost to the patients. That's pretty much everything I wanted. Thanks.
Thank you, Clinton. We are going to now go to Christine Stenquist. Christine, you have 2 minutes starting now.
Thank you, board. I appreciate the time. I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that the departments actually do have the
Christine, could
responsibility.
you, I'm sorry to interrupt, could you state your affiliation?
Oh, of course. My name's Christine Stenquist. I'm the president of Truce Together for Responsible Use in Cannabis Education. We are a nonprofit. We do not gain anything financially from educating the public and the stakeholders of our state. I want to draw attention to a particular clause in our law that states quite definitely that the health department and the ag department do have the responsibility. In accordance with Title 63G, Chapter 3, Utah Administrative Rulemaking, the department may make rules to determine required adulterant tests of cannabis plant production products, cannabis concentrates, and cannabis products. I'm going to include that clause right here in the comment section so that you all can read it and understand you cannot continue to pass the buck onto others. It is time to take responsibility for what the legislators have given the departments, Rich. I am tired of this, and so are the patients of this state. Every single doctor on this board has clearly stated this is not how we practice medicine. It's not. And the patients who are paying quite a bit of money to participate in this program deserve proper representation from their state agencies. That is my time.
Thank you so much, Christine. I'm going to go ahead and call on Mark Viner now. Mark, you may have 2 minutes. Please state any affiliations.
Mark Viner, physician, no affiliations. I think we're overemphasizing the 8, the 10, the THCP. What about just minor cannabinoids that are natural? Like you'll see fake THCV that's hemp derived. So I believe as a prescriber and the patient should document they've both reviewed the certificate of authenticity together and sign like a consent form when you're practicing medicine, because all you need is the THC content. If it's 0.03 or less, then you know it's hemp derived. So if the ratio of the minor cannabinoid, THCV, for example, to the major cannabinoid delta 9 is greater than 1, you know it's fake. Or you can tell the patient, even though it's high dose THCV, it's not really natural. This will be excellent for the doctor and the patient. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm going to go ahead and call on Zach Newell King. Zach, please state any affiliations that you may have. You have 2 minutes starting now.
Sure. My name is Zachary King. I'm a medical cannabis patient. I'm also a patient advocate with Truce Together for Responsible Use in Cannabis Education. If we could have websites like Wholesome Co., Beehive, and all the other pharmacies to have full panel COAs with terpenes, cannabinoids, pesticides, whether it's organic or not. We need clean, organic CBD and THC. Our full 4 ounces of flour and our full 20 grams of concentrate affordable. 10 years ago today, I lost my wife, Jenna, unfortunately, to a negative interaction with Ambien. So I am completely and totally against any isomer or anything that can take a life away or that can have a negative interaction. If we can have clean, safe cannabis and hemp, they're the same thing, guys. I hate to tell you this. They're the same genus. They're cannabis sativa. And the way we treat the plant is how it will interact and how it will help us and heal us. And I hope and pray that we as patients can get rid of this, just the QMP model, and have true safe adult access, 21 and older. I was working in Montana. I could afford my concentrate. I could afford my flour. Whereas when I come back home, I'm struggling again. And if we can do more to help patients be empowered with clean, safe, organic medicine, to get out these isomers, to get out any negative chemical or compound, we could truly have what could transform people's lives. I could get through my workday without fatigue. I could get through everything. Whereas right now we're just barely getting by. We're just like that little engine that could, and we need to really get focused on nature, get focused on clean organic medicine versus the synthetic garbage that is killing people, whether we realize it or not. All cannabis use is medicinal, and what we choose to do with this plant and how we choose to treat each other and whether we want to be a money grab or whether we want to be a compassionate force, we can do what we want in Utah, and we can understand the science and we can understand the medicine. And that's what I challenge us all to do. I love you all and I appreciate what you do, but we need more clean, organic, safe medicine, live resin and live rosin
Zach. That's
and
2
everything.
minutes.
Thank you guys.
We're so grateful to have your comment. I'm going to go to Drew Howells now. Drew, please state your name, affiliations, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Drew Howells. I'm affiliated with Utah Veterans for Medical Cannabis. I'm also a State Veterans Caucus chairman, and I'm a board member and advisor for Truce. We need more than just what's being done. I'll give you an example of what happened to me last night. I received a delivery from one of the dispensaries, and 60% of my order had Delta 6 alpha-10 alpha in it. None of this is noted on the website, and the only way patients find out it's in it is if you're getting delivery when it shows up. And in many cases, patients aren't able to handle the package to see the small print that says this has synthetic derivatives until they're already outside of the store after their point of sale purchase. There's a lot of products still on the shelves that contain these contaminants that were there before it was required to be labeled. I would encourage the Department of Health and Department of Ag to at least recall these products and at least require them to be retested and relabeled to comply with the existing rules. My final question is, which agency is going to accept liability for the safety of these unknowns? I've asked a few lawyers and government folks, and they all seem to say the liability falls on the regulating authority. So I'm asking you, Richard, as the person sitting at the head of the state regulating agency, are you going to accept the liability with all these unknowns? Is the state of Utah going to accept liability? We live in such a litigious state where we sue over everything. With all these unknowns, who's going to take responsibility? Just simply talk to your doctor while ignoring all the specialists saying one thing while you're saying you don't know is not enough. You're the regulating authority. Stop trying to play both sides and regulate on the side of caution and patient safety. My doctors have counseled me to avoid this stuff at all costs until we know more. You've heard from doctors and specialists. It's not like you don't know at this point. Ignoring evidence for performative ignorance is not a thing the regulating authority should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. I'm going to go ahead and move to Shireen. Shireen, please go ahead and state your name and any affiliations. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Shireen Tawadi. And as well, I am a very complex patient when it comes to what I have to struggle with. And my doctors have told me to stay away from these synthetics at all cost.
Shireen, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you state if you're affiliated or if you are unaffiliated with any organizations?
I'm a patient advocate with Truce.
Thank you so much.
And so I can't be a test subject. I can't allow my my body basically to just not be part of what's going on here. So I have to withdraw from purchasing these products. And exactly what Drew said, who is going to take the responsibility when it comes to someone getting really sick or dying? This is not how any type of medicine is given to patients. It's not how a medical program should be run. So I'm really concerned, and I appreciate what the physicians have brought to the table here and what they've explained. But yeah, I just think that we need to make a better effort at cleaning up our program. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Shireen. I'm going to go ahead and call on Leslie Engelking. Leslie, go ahead and state your name, any affiliations, and you have 2 minutes starting now.
Perfect. Thank you. I am Leslie Engelking. I'm the founder of Focus, which is a 501c3 nonprofit cannabis health and safety organization. I do not have any formal affiliations, nor do I have any financial stake in the cannabis industry. I wanted to just start by saying this has been a terrific discussion, and I'm very grateful to everybody on the call for their input and ability to listen. Frankly, those are typically hard things to get to. I did want to say a couple comments. One, when we were talking about isolation and there being things left over, I mean, the whole process of creating an isolate is to isolate. So there shouldn't be things left over. And I feel like that really comes back to process control. And while testing is always going to be so critical to the end product safety, if we're not controlling the processes of these cultivators and processors, just like we would a food manufacturer or a pharmaceutical manufacturer, we're missing the boat. That's like making toast and burning it and then scraping it off, right? The product is already safe or not safe by the time it gets to the testing lab. And so my point today is just to say that Focus is here to help. We would love to provide training, education, information, guidance to the state, to the operators, so that we can really help them get better and make sure that these processes are where they need to be. Like I said, I think this first discussion today is a great, not the first, but the discussion today has been a great and enlightening one with some good next steps. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Leslie. Emily Tucker, I'm going to go ahead and have you state your name and the affiliations, and you have 2 minutes starting now.
Hi, I'm a patient. I also like to hang out with Truce when I can. I just wanted to restate what Christine Stenquist said and put this at the feet of the health department and the ag department. Please help us. I did enjoy this meeting quite a bit more. I loved all the science and learning more about the processes, so I appreciate that, and I would love more of that. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Emily. Christine Larson, go ahead and state your name and any affiliations. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Kristen Larson. I have no affiliates other than being a patient and an active member of Truce. You know, I wanted to just speak to the financial pressure that is being put upon us as patients. When it costs $50 for an 1/8 of an ounce of medicine, and we are trying so hard to stick with this program. We want it to work. We want to play by the rules. We've all been through a lot of trauma with this whole program and trying to take our health into our own hands. I feel very frustrated that as a patient, I am walking out of a dispensary becoming more sick than I was walking in. It's not right, it's not ethical, and it's being driven by power, money, and control and bureaucracies. And the more I attend these meetings, the more frustrated I get. While I appreciate everybody's voice at the table, everybody I see is working so hard to solve this problem. I wish I had more expertise and knowledge to contribute. What I only have is my story and my own personal lived experience. I beg you to have really great financial things. Why can't we take back in our medicine and get a refund if it's making us sick? How can we solve this financial problem? It's a burden that we are all carrying as patients. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. I don't see any further hands raised. Does anyone else wish to make a comment at this time?
I want to sort of take from all these comments, which are greatly appreciated. Your insights as patients mean a lot. You're the front lines. You know, your information is what we now as providers depend upon. We need that feedback. You've provided it. Thank you. I have a suggestion because we need to move expeditiously. The wheels of administration and bureaucracy, as you know, just grind along slowly. I think what we need, and I'm going to make this as a suggestion, Katie, and maybe as a motion, maybe we don't need a motion, maybe we just do it. But I think what we need as a board, speaking as the Cannabis Research Review Board, we need a legal opinion sooner than later as to who has the authority to make rule changes with regards to what constituents are allowed or not allowed in medical products sold at the dispensaries. If it turns out it's an executive branch decision, that means through Ag and Health and Human Services, so be it. If it turns out it is legislature as in statutes are interpreted, so be it. We need to know so that we as a board can then move swiftly with recommendations back up to the health department, to ag, or to our legislative contacts. But we are not lawyers. We cannot interpret statute. We don't even play them on TV, to use that old sad worn out joke. So we need a legal opinion. We have access to legal counsel through this board. So if that could be arranged, Katie, I don't know if you want the little executive group here to just meet on a quick call with counsel, but that I think might be the most helpful, or simply to ask that question and get the opinion. And Rich, you're the sort of the liaison here. So if that could be established, and make contact today with legal counsel and set up a meeting for tomorrow, or at the earliest possible convenience, then at least the board can be duly informed and we can move appropriately. Katie, does that comport with your?
I think that makes a lot of sense, because, you know, I think to have that, it seems that there's a little bit of confusion, or maybe conflicting interpretations already that came up in this meeting. So I think I like that suggestion, Perry. I think it doesn't really matter what the outcome is. I think we have to be clear on where that rulemaking authority lies. And I think we do need some expert advice on that.
So unless somebody's opposed to that, I don't think we need a vote on the board. I think, Katie, you just simply have to, as the chair, ask for a consultation, and when it's convenient to either make it in writing or in through a phone call, whatever.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Perry. I think, Rich, maybe we can discuss that.
Yeah, we have assistant attorney generals that are assigned to the department, and we're happy to coordinate with you as the chair, Dr. Carlson, as we share information about the legal interpretation that we have. And we're familiar with all the laws that have been brought up during this meeting. Those have been evaluated and visited in depth, and we can share some of that analysis.
Great, thanks.
Can I jump in real quick? I just wanted to make sure. So we've received all of the comments, and Perry kind of kicked it off, but I just wanted to formally invite everyone to, if there's any responses to the specific questions or comments that were made.
Yeah, I think there were two questions or comments that brought up the issue of cost for patients. And I think we can answer that. We don't have authority there. And I don't think we have kind of real-time knowledge as a board that falls outside of our area of our reach. So I want to say, I think those are great questions and great issues to bring up, but I'm not sure that they're going to get addressed here.
Can I add?
I think they should be
point out really quick that on the cost issue, that is something that lawmakers continue to evaluate. They're identifying strategies to help with that. During the last legislative session, in the 2021 session, they passed legislation to make, I think, progress on empowering patients to make decisions about what provider they use and which ones accept insurance, which ones don't. And I've talked about that, I think, in detail at previous meetings.
Yeah, it has come up. Yeah.
There's even beyond that potential amendments to the law during the 2023 session that may indirectly or directly address that concern.
Let's get Matt and Jennifer both it looks like they have some comments here. So Matt, go ahead, and then you, Jennifer.
Oh, I didn't have much more to add. That is an issue for patients, not only the cost of the product, but then, behind that, all the fees and regulations that contribute to that. And then the cost of seeing providers that's an issue that I feel strongly about. I wish that was less. So, but I don't have any answers, so I'll defer to Jennifer. But I do appreciate that that's a big issue, and I'm glad the legislature has a strategy, at least talking about it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jennifer.
So my question is also about one of the patients' concerns about being able to see the label of the product they're going to purchase prior to bringing it home, and who would be responsible for assuring that that's actually available on a website for the company that's making it. I mean, I think that's a reasonable request.
Yeah, Dr. Morris, that is something that we can take a look at in administrative rule. We do have some authority in that respect, and we have passed some rules recently, and that don't require specifically that, but I'm happy to report back to the board what might be feasible. We know that in this past year, we did add a law that enables a patient to request a certificate of analysis from the pharmacy. And so that there is that legal right they have to request that from a pharmacy. And but you bring up a good point. Well, what about the detail that's available online? Because everybody is going online and ordering online often, right? So it's important that that information not only be available in the COA upon request, but detail be available on a website to a certain extent. And I'll take a look at that, Jennifer. We're all, just so you know, we're also in process of working with our outreach specialists on creating a patient guide for understanding the labels. And we'll share that with board members once that's drafted, that's created, and then we'll share it with patients. We'll have it available on our website. It's something we're working closely with the board on, or not, excuse me, not the board, Department of Ag on right now, but there'll come a time when we want to get input from others regarding it as well. And then that'll be an additional resource that patients will have with them. So I'll take the assignment to evaluate how we might be able to put something like that that would be reasonable in the rule to require that more information from the website.
Jennifer, you hearken us back to our effort to actually have a coherent list of all products with their contents in one location, which I would suggest should be under the Center for Cannabis, Medical Cannabis website, rather than everybody having to search through the thousands or the many hundreds to 1,000 plus individual products with different names and so forth, but that could be cross-referenced to those. And in that central, coherent list could, it could state exactly what the COAs, state are in them. And then people can go shopping for that product specifically. So that would be one way of dealing with it. And we never really fulfilled that project goal. What we did was we created some slides that showed that we've got tons of products, or tons, forgive my language. We've got over 1,000 products that have extremely high THC and almost nothing else in them. And then a few products that have, at the best, 1-to-1 CBD to THC. So that's all we've proven, but that really doesn't help the public much. The other thing with regards to cost, it's a huge issue. As the CRRB, I think we at least would want to, within our purview, we don't have authority over cost, but I think what we can ask for is to parse out the costs of cultivation, costs of harvest, cost of initial process, costs of secondary processing and concentrating, and ultimately determine what the cost to the product is up until the time it goes into the commercial hands, and then the costs from there on, so we can actually determine what's true margin and what's profitability. And at least the public should at least, this is a state program, the public should at least have access to that. And we can ask for it, we should ask for it. And then there are regulatory costs. I mean, every time you do testing, sadly but truly, it costs somebody something. That's all right now being passed on to the consumer. Maybe that's fair, maybe it's not, but maybe that should be a more broadly budgeted item for testing, since it's a state program, and the regulatory costs should be borne, in a different way. But I think we should at least ask for that. And Rich, I don't know, that's sort of asking a lot. But I think we do need somebody with at least a business economics background to go in and, as any CFO would do in any program, and start trying to parse out what are the various costs and how do they add up, and what is ultimately the profitability.
Yeah, Perry, as you know, there's several factors that impact cost, and I think a general response would be the cost depends, depending on the company. They have different costs for every company for things. There's some general ranges, right? And so I just think it's important that you realize it's not an exact.
Yeah, I wasn't really asking so much for discussion as an evaluation at this point to determine what all those variables are. I think this is a question that this board has a right to ask and a right to determine and know, to determine what are all the difference and what are the vagaries. And if it's hard, let's work through the difficulty of it. We're all it's not like we haven't faced difficulties before in answering and getting at different questions around this. So this is the first time it's really come to this board as a sort of an open question from a lot of the discussants. And right now, the legislature has looked at addressing this in all sorts of ways, like opening up to more providers and so forth. That hasn't been a solution. So us as a board take on the question of what are the basic pharmacoeconomics of this program, from cultivation to sales, and let the commercial side of it be answerable to what their costs are. Let us be answerable up until the point it gets into their hands as to what those costs are. Fair enough?
Yeah, there was I forget who made the presentation, but at the meeting
governance
in September or October, the governance structure was, demonstrated to be a $3.2 billion industry. I'm sure I'm getting the numbers wrong, at full capacity. And I felt that too, Perry, that was missing a few pieces that the public might want to know, because the industry, profits are coming from patients, or the public through some sort of public funding. I'm not sure, but it seemed to be about how much money could be made if you were in the industry, which I understand is important, but it was missing exactly what Perry's talking about, which is, what are the cost and profit? What's determining those, and what does full capacity mean? So I agree. I think that would help. I mean, we get questions about costs at just about every single meeting we've had since this.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think one forum that will be potentially available in the future to the board and to the public and to the industry is if a medical cannabis advisory board is created during the 2023 session. This, I think, is a topic to bring up to that, potentially the chair of that board, because that would be, I think, more within the purview of the responsibilities of that potential board. It's a public meeting, it's transparent, and there'll be staff that are dedicated to that board that can help support some of the requests. Because what you requested is something that is not simple. It's complex. It's a major project, and I think that could be a really good forum for that question to be considered.
But that doesn't exist yet. That committee doesn't exist.
It doesn't, and we can reach out to the industry. There's a lot of different factors that impact the cost. I'm happy to generate that start, so to help the board understand what some general ranges of cost are, because the bottom line is it depends on a lot of different factors, and I'm not a business person, but that's my impression. There's a lot of different factors that are being considered, but what we could do is reach out to the Utah Cannabis Association, make a very simple request. Hey, can you have a representative share what you know about this? And we can go from there.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's going to be very helpful, particularly, something like this really needs an independent pharmacoeconomist to do the evaluation from start to finish. And if we don't have the resources, we don't have the resources, but we ought to at least ask them. And why is it a business of this board? Because we are charged with looking at evidence. We're charged at understanding safety. We're understanding at understanding efficacy. Yeah. And cost always is a critical issue in this, that you can't divorce cost from what ultimately translates into safety and what may or may not be efficacious. So at least we ought to be able to ask, and if we don't have the resources, we don't, but it at least puts it out there that this is something that's critically important. That's our job right now. And until we either dissolve or are forced to go away or mutate into something else, I think we take our job seriously and we go forward with these questions.
And we're glad that you do that. We want to support the board in taking a look at some of the issues that are within its scope. Absolutely. And
thank you.
So much of cannabis is interrelated, right? The board scope is only so much, but there's so many things that are so closely related to the narrow focus of the board.
Any other comments from the board related to the questions that came up before we wrap up? Jennifer, I see that your hand is up, but I think that might be a leftover hand.
Yeah, I think it was a leftover hand. My only other issue was that whatever outreach we do, it'd be really nice to have links, as I mentioned before, from the EVS website to the DHHS website. I think that the people go to EVS and they don't necessarily go to DHHS websites. And so the more we can facilitate that, I think both for providers and for patients, and making that easy, just one click and it directs you to things that would be really helpful. I did
Jennifer, thank you. And that I thought was going to be on the agenda. I think it needs some time. It wasn't quite ready, I think. But we are aware, that you brought that up before and that you're looking into that. It's essentially taking what we're learning and putting it where it needs to be, including dosing information, which we created a long time ago, and it's there, but it's not accessible. So that's something, that we're aware of, and that's a really important piece. In fact, I'd like that to be a priority. I think the derivatives and the issues came up that we wanted Brandon to help us get a little clarity on. And that discussion took quite some time. So I'm glad we gave it the time that it needed. But Jennifer, that's not lost, and much thanks for the work you started on that.
And we want to take action on that. Dr. Norris will be in touch.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, well, I think that brings us to 11 a.m. and have to look at exactly how to, I think we need someone to move to end the meeting.
Also move.
I'll second.
Thank you, Matt and Misty, and thanks everyone for coming. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.